God put her on my heart because a lot of people cast her aside. And they didn't understand her. And the Lord spoke to me one day, Chrissy, I've probably told you this, and He said to me, don't let that woman go. And I only had contact with her on Messenger. I didn't even have her email, her phone number. She was very obscure in her movements. And that's one of the beautiful things about you, is you're very free-spirited. And I don't say that in the New Age sense. I say that in the godly sense. And the Lord has an incredible way of speaking to her, which you're going to hear about tonight. So I really honor you. It took a lot of earning I had to earn her trust for her to actually come and book and sit down with me privately. And now I understand why. But eventually she allowed me to have a more structured ministry session. Jody, also very committed, very intelligent girl. And I think you've got a lot of potential in you to do a lot for God. I really do. There's an incredible... you articulate incredibly well. And what happens with a lot of people I minister to is I'm the one having to look for the fingerprint of Satan. Jody was very good at articulating her emotions, and it made it very easy for me to actually... And what she went through usually can take a long time. We actually got to where we are at the moment very quickly, just because of the way she articulated it. Ranesh, what I want to credit Ranesh with is his commitment to faith. You never wavered. You went through very difficult times, and you still have some challenges. But where you are now compared to 3 years ago is profound. And Ranesh is my best friend. So we met, we called each other one day, and that's where the journey began. And when I heard Ranesh's story, I actually put the phone down. I've said this before, and I said, God, this is complicated. So I didn't know what to do. But I pursued as what I do, and then we got to an amazing place right now. So I'm going to begin by asking them questions to help them articulate their story. So firstly, Ranesh, I'm going to begin with you. But just to explain to people a little bit, schizophrenia is something Ranesh was diagnosed with a long time ago. It's a very challenging condition. And I'm just going to give you some points about how you diagnose this kind of thing. Working as an exorcist, psychologists will diagnose it from a professional point of view, but when you're ministering on a spiritual level, you also need to understand these things. So I ask questions like, how long has the person been this way? What first triggered it? Because schizophrenia is triggered. Have they always been like this? Did a traumatic incident happen? A life event? Is it medically treatable? Voices, are they dissociated aspects or alter personalities of the mind? Are they demons? Are there aspects of consciousness that have lost touch with reality? Because sometimes when people go with trauma, and the way I deal with mental conditions is most of them, and the high percentage of them, are trauma-based. They come out of trauma. And then if there's been ancestral trauma and war or all kinds of abuse and rejection, some people are born with a predisposition to fall victim to that mental condition. So someone like myself or Pastor Mark may be able to go through the same traumatic event as Ranesh, and we would be able to sustain through it. But because of a predisposition, that same event has a huge impact on someone like Ranesh. So Ranesh, I'm going to begin to ask you some questions. Where were you born? When did you move to Australia? And how old are you? Just for the single woman out there.
So I was born and brought up in Fiji. That's where my parents came from. And I started my journey in Fiji and had a pretty reasonable life, growing up in Fiji with family and friends, and there was no issues, just normal childhood with nothing in particular that really affected me. So towards my later teen years, around 18 and 19, that's when I noticed the onset of depression, and I was feeling lonely and couldn't connect with people, and I think that's when all this started, and I knew that something was wrong. And then my father passed away when I was 19, so that was a loss to our family. mom and I were alone, and so that kind of triggered more of depression and anxiety.
And Ranesh, was there a particular event besides your father passing away? And I know you were studying to become a pilot. Can you believe that? He was studying to become a pilot. So, wasn't it around that time that this also triggered things?
That was also a trigger. Stress at studies. Migrated to New Zealand after my father passed away, and being in a challenging environment like aviation brought out more stress and.
Did you struggle dealing with stressful situations compared to other people?
I normally was, a bit quieter and not able to connect with people. But being in my teens, I thought it would go away, and I would do better. Yeah.
You know that there were times I used to come to Sydney, I couldn't even have a conversation with Ranesh. This is a miracle, how he's articulating and engaging in this. So it's amazing. Is there anything you want to say before I ask you another question?
So this actually led me to be curious about myself. I was kind of curious as to why I was getting depressed and didn't know where the answers came from. And my family was brought up Hindus, and so all we knew when we consulted our prayer or families was that you do some pujas and get your healing done, or consult a priest, and if there's anything that's not right, you would get well. And that's how I kind of dealt with.
So did you turn, when you started realizing there were problems, did you turn to firstly to Hindu meditation techniques, or I remember you said you'd gone on some camps of meditation and that?
Yes, I started exploring meditation and yoga to fight depression.
Did you do Kundalini yoga?
Not Kundalini, but I think it was transcendental meditation.
Transcendental meditation. Yeah. And give us an example of one camp where you spent a lot of time in that camp, like a long period of time. Wasn't there one where you spent 10 days somewhere in...
Yeah, I've been to the Hindu retreats where you go out on a retreat and spend quite a bit of time.
And what did that do? Did it improve your situation or make it worse?
It felt calm at the time.
At first,
yeah, it meant but I didn't know that I was opening the door to things that's not right. It just kind of showed up later in my life. Yeah.
And then things escalated from there. Because what I want to do today is also just bring to people's attention how you did seek lots of different kind of help. Didn't you also at one point you joined the Jehovah's Witness Church?
Yes, and the walk to Christianity began when everything was collapsing on me, and I had a very difficult period of time and I was seeking for answers, and I kind of reached out to a Jehovah's.
And how long were you in the Jehovah's Witness Church?
I think on and off 2-3 years. Yeah.
And then the Mormon Church, how long were you there?
Mormon, on and off about 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. And were they also trying to help you?
Yeah, they were trying to help me. Through prayers, but the symptoms were still presenting.
And then at one point, and I wanted to mention this just so people out there know this, at one point you actually found an Islamic exorcist.
Yeah, because what happened was that once I joined the Christian faith, I had a massive spiritual experience, or I could call it psychosis, where the spiritual world kind of clashed, the Hindu side of me and the...
This is an important point. I'm going to allow Ranesh to talk more on this. A lot of people, this is where false Christian teaching causes a lot of damage, is when people get saved and there's demons or evil spirits. At salvation, the war begins. And the demonic kingdoms within them just turn themselves upside down. And then the Christian false teachings that say, Christians can't have demons, it just turns that on its head. And people like Ranesh, or people that have been in this situation, then are confused. They've got somebody saying you can't have this, but they know what they're experiencing. So, Ranesh, you got saved, and then the Hindu kingdoms and all this really got angry.
Yeah, there was big manifestations, and I didn't know what to do. Like, I didn't know prayer, I didn't know whom to consult, and we tried to go back to Fiji and to all sorts of rituals, Hindu rituals, and family said to exorcism and Islam prophet that did, and what it did was it made it more worse instead of solving the problem. It created dissociation in my mind and distortion, and the voices got louder, visions got more intense.
So can you imagine what Ranesh was going through? And by the way, I just want to honor Pastor Rui out there if he's watching. He was also a big part of Ranesh's journey. He used to visit them and was a massive part. So we want to honor you too, Pastor Rui. Can you imagine having your own voices in your head through the schizophrenia plus other spiritual forces at the same time, taking advantage, piggybacking onto a condition? So, Ranesh, one thing I wanted to ask you, one of the main powers, I think one of the contributing powers to amplifying the effects of your mental condition was Kundalini. And I remember when you flew up to Tweed Heads, we had quite a powerful session that one time where we dealt with Kundalini. We were breaking down the chakras and shutting them because of all the meditation it got involved in. It's obviously, it activates the chakras. And for those of you who don't understand the 7 chakras, which is expressed in New Age and in Hinduism, and by the way, for those who don't know, New Age is Western Hinduism. Westerners don't really understand that. It's actually Hinduism, but a Western form of it. And what Kundalini does, Kundalini is one of the contributing factors to schizophrenia, just so you know that. It's not the only, but it's one of the contributing factors. So Ranesh, then we had a Zoom. Remember that one Zoom we had with Pastor Rui, Pastor Dave,
Yes.
yourself and me?
Yeah.
And we were breaking each chakra down one by one. Mm-hmm. Remember the manifestations in that Zoom?
Yeah, I mean, basically I was manifesting at each chakra, and it's like what the demonic does. It creates kingdoms in your own system, in your own mind, and in your own body. And what I noticed throughout my journey with Christ and with pastors is that every time Christ came in and healed certain parts of me, when I had prayer, when I had deliverance. So it's just like layers been peeled off, and because of years of trauma and abuse, and so lots of things that piled up on me.
Yep.
The Holy Spirit was so gentle not to deliver me completely, at once, because.
Well, let's just address that point, Ranesh. You said God didn't deliver me immediately. Why do you think that was?
I think it's both the walk of faith, to build up a faith in Christ and to rely on Him as well, and also that certain things, experiential life experiences bring in more challenges. And
I want to just extend on that point of Ranesh. What evil spirits do, just so you know, they actually create mind patterns. So when you've been in a certain situation, let's just say there's an evil spirit present in a person's life, it will provoke certain mindsets. It can provoke false doctrine mindsets. It can provoke an attraction to New Age mindsets. And then people become Christians, and there's also the renewing of the mind. So that's why sometimes deliverance is a process. Because as you peel off one layer of the onion, which could be a kingdom, some people have literally kingdoms in them, and each kingdom has a strong man. And you've got to work through that kingdom. Then when that kingdom's removed, there's a renewing of the mind. There's a filling of faith and the word. Ranesh, how important was church life for you?
I think it was my lifesaver. Like, I didn't know where to turn. And when I turned to Christ, there was so much hope. I met so many wonderful people that supported me along the journey, and Pastor Ambrose and Pastor Joy have been part of that journey as well. So all those things really kept me out of mental health institution and heavy medication. I mean, started off with heavy medication when I was, but it eventually came down, and I got more control over my thoughts and feelings, and only in the last few years that I can say that it's all coming together.
Yes.
With a lot of perseverance and help from mom
Mm.
and family, it makes a
Yes,
change.
we've got to honour Manor's fish curry. All right? We've got to honour that today. There's no fish curry like that I've ever tasted. It's delicious. Ranesh, I want to point out one episode that happened. I want to say it's funny, but it wasn't funny. Do you remember that time when you tried to go cold turkey off your medication and you were fasting at the same time and you ended up in emergency ward?
Yes, I remember.
You remember that?
Pretty well.
So, Ranesh was just, as you go through the medication for schizophrenia, you got to find the right brand. Didn't you go through a lot of medications?
Yeah, at least 5 or 6 medications.
Yeah. And you went cold turkey that time and it didn't end too well.
It didn't. I think the demonic didn't like that, and it was a weak point, and so it just kind of ended.
And one thing I want to say about Indian people, what I've noticed, even the Hindu people, they've all got a quality about them, and they're very consistent. Consistent people. Now notice when Indian people become Christians, they just transfer that same commitment to Christianity. So I really love Hindu people, and I often speak to people that are Hindus and not Christian, and they've all got that same quality about them. So I want to honor the Indian people for their commitment. And your example, you guys share, you show an amazing example of how to walk a Christian journey. And I know every culture has committed people, so I'm going to start to talk to Jody and then Chrissy, and then we can all get involved. Thanks, Ranesh. One more question, Ranesh, I've got here. You needed a lot of support, especially over a period of 2 years. You really needed that support.
Yes.
And there was a combined effort with a lot of us to support. Now I've noticed you're actually doing very well without that support.
Yes, I think that's what has happened, that the Holy Spirit, and I can feel, because I've been exposed to the spiritual world, I've seen the grace of God over my life, and it's amazing, because your eyes, when you open up to the spiritual world, and when you see the angels fighting your battles, and you see the tangible presence of God in your life, and how He carries you, and all I can say that Jesus is faithful. He's so faithful in everything that we go. Yeah. He's in our valleys, in our highs, and there's no word to describe who.
Let's give Ranesh a hand. And I can't understand why he's single. Can you imagine? Why is a guy like this single? But anyway, I don't embarrass you. Jody, I've got some questions for you. So, Jody, you're from Australia. You were born here. Obviously, and I've met your mother. Your mother's wonderful. I love your father-in-law. I love your family. You're a very good family. How do you want to start this discussion about your life?
It's okay, I know how to turn microphones on, that's good. How do I like to start? Well, I guess I grew up in a Christian home. Like, I had good parents that brought me up in the church, and I grew up in a Pentecostal church, so I was always aware of the spiritual realm. That was never really an issue for me. I made a decision to become a Christian when I was only 5 years old. My mum walked me through the prayer, and she said even right away that I was a completely different kid. I used to be pretty bratty, 5-year-old, skipping classes and stuff. But after that, she said she saw a change in me, and so I grew up knowing God. But later on in my life, I fell away from the church and fell away from God. Just got caught up in false doctrines.
But was it your culture? What do you think contributed to you falling away? Was it just the influence of your culture?
I think, yes, for sure, the culture. Western culture opens you up to so many different things, and especially my generation with social media. I grew up on social media, so I got exposed to a lot of different ideas, and so I wasn't as sheltered as I guess other generations were before me. And so, I guess I'm a part of the progressive church. A big part of that is just, like we said, exposure to culture.
Can you define the progressive church for people?
Oh, yeah. So I got caught up in this doctrine later in my life called progressive Christianity. I had started going to this public school. I grew up going to Christian school, so I never was really exposed to anything else. And a lot of the people around me were part of the LGBTQ community. A lot of feminism, things like that was integrated into a lot of the schooling I was getting exposed to, and as well as social media. I got caught up in a lot of activism on social media, and I just became self-conscious of the idea that like I wasn't compassionate enough towards people, because people knew I was a Christian in high school, but they used to call me things like homophobic, things like that, and I got self-conscious about that because I guess I grew up in a church that said in order to show Christ you have to show love. And so I got warped the meaning of what love was and what showing love is. As I know now, love isn't just fully acceptance of who, people's lifestyles.
Good point, yeah.
But I thought that's what love was. So I went down just a rabbit hole of watching YouTube videos, social media things, of just people making just an image of Christ in their own image. That's what I would describe progressive Christianity is. Just it's warping the Bible into your own beliefs. So
many roads lead to God.
Yeah, exactly. Many things like many roads lead to God. I stopped believing in like the idea of hell. I didn't believe that was real. I believed that God accepted the gay lifestyle, even questioned my own sexuality, and I got caught up in feminism. I hated the idea of ever submitting to anybody.
There might have been another contributing factor.
Yeah. Well, yeah, growing up I was quite rebellious in a way. So just caught up in trying to put those ideologies into Christianity. So there would be many excuses that progressive Christians would make, saying things like, the translation has been warped, things like, it's just a cultural thing back then, but it doesn't apply now. And it was just warping the word of God into your own ideas as opposed to actually following what the Bible says and what God commands us.
Yeah, you see that there are actually physical churches around the world. That it's more established in America, but it does exist here. They're called progressive churches, and you can be atheist and go to church, and they don't teach that Jesus is the only way to heaven. They worship songs, they preach, they do everything a traditional church does, but Jesus isn't the only way to heaven. So that's what Jodie's referring to. She got caught up in that. But what's interesting, so my job is to find the root. Why was Jodie attracted to that? Why was she drawn to feminism? Why all these things? You have to understand that evil spirits have ideologies. Satan has his own religion. And his religion is called the doctrine of emanations. I wrote this in my book. I explained the doctrine of emanations. It means this. And if you go into the pre-flood world and read many of the books of the Apocrypha, like the book of Enoch 1, the book of Jubilees, the book of Jasher, combined with the Bible, you discover that Satan believed, or he propagated this belief, that God created everything. Do you remember Star Wars? They would always say, "May the Force be with you." Right? That statement is profound because it refers to the universe. And as you've seen in Hollywood, this is the religion that's promoted. The universe is being kind to us. It's sending me messages. And so Satan propagated this belief. Satan's actually a paganist. That's essentially his religion. His religion is that God created the universe, mankind, animals, everything. And once he had created, he had given of himself into his creation, therefore became a lesser form and version of himself, and then just emptied himself like a mist into the universe and became part of the universe. Therefore, may the force be with you. So that's what it meant. But there was ancestral rejection in Jodie's bloodline. So rejection is not only established through the way you're raised, that can contribute, but also what's in the bloodline ancestrally. And there was abuse ancestrally in her bloodline. So she inherited in her DNA these feelings of rejection. So therefore, it gives a foothold for entities like Jezebel and things like that. And Jodie, I want to just talk about the one session we had on Zoom where we dealt with the spiritual spouse. Because if you've got rejection in the bloodline, it can open the door for an entity called a spiritual spouse. And what that is, it's something in Satan's kingdom, because that individual was rejected, somewhere down the bloodline. That entity comes to take ownership over that individual. And then this is inherited through the DNA and the bloodline, as the Bible describes, to the third and fourth extended generations. So what was interesting about that session, Jody, is that entity, when we were driving out, was incredibly distraught and was weeping. Can you explain what you were feeling? And before you do that, I'll just tell you in my experience, literally every time I deal with this entity called spiritual spouse, in Africa it's very well known, it is devastated when you drive it out. Because it's literally like being divorced from somebody you adore. Except they don't adore the person, but they've invested their entire being into that individual. Can you explain what you were going through that session?
Yeah, I just also want to add to that. I think big part of it also was like rejection plus rebellion, because as it says, in the Bible, witchcraft is the sin of rebellion, and so progressive Christianity is a form of witchcraft because it's rebellion against God. And
so would you say rebellion in your life was the stronghold of those entities? We could say rejection in the bloodline was the legal right.
Yeah.
But would you say the rebellion that was coming out of that was the stronghold?
Well, I think it was a bit of both, because as we discovered in our other session that on my father's side there was Freemasonry.
Yeah.
And so I think the demons from those ancestral spirits were gravitating me towards things that were witchcraft. But the thing is, my mother always stopped me from getting involved in things like the New Age stuff.
That's
she was
why good parenting is important.
Yeah, exactly. So the demons, I guess, had to find another way in, and that was through progressive Christianity.
Can you believe it? Can you believe that? Eh? That's how creative the demonic is. Put her in a church, but because it was in rebellion, it was witchcraft.
Yeah. And then on top of that, the rejection from my peers calling me homophobic then also put me in that position. But yeah, rejection is, there's a lot of that in my bloodline. Like, my parents have had issues with it. My grandfather actually was born out of wedlock, so he doesn't know who his great-grandfather is. So I don't know a lot about my generational line. So there's definitely the orphan.
Let's talk about that
rejection.
curse, Jody, the curse of illegitimacy, and it's very common. In fact, I think Australia, I don't know if it's US statistics or Australian statistics, that above 40% of children are now born out of wedlock. And this curse is called the curse of illegitimacy. And what it means is the effects it takes in a person's life. They can actually be born into a loving family, but Satan has a legal claim because of them, the way they're born. And so they always feel unaccepted in society. And therefore, how convenient for politics that's created this space of discrimination laws that actually create a family for people like Jody was. Make them feel accepted. You're part of our clan. In fact, when the truth is, the politicians couldn't care less about them. They want to push an agenda for themselves. So they use these rejected people for their agenda. So Jody, continue.
Yeah, so I guess go back to that session we had with the spiritual spouse. What was brought up in that session was the demon had mentioned incest in my father's bloodline.
Down the bloodline,
yeah, and as well as the things that I got to with progressive Christianity, ideas of self-pleasure was okay.
Yes.
And so I got involved
I think
in
it's
that.
good to address that because young people deal with that.
Yeah, so...
Just to make a point here, Jody, what she just referred to there, people that fill out my forms, 95% of people struggle with that. And 99% of the people that fill out my forms are Christians. So you can understand how many people suffer with that condition. Carry on.
Yeah, so I definitely think that was a big part of that. And so even becoming a Christian again after going through that progressive Christian doctrine, I was still suffering from dreams. Even though I had put that sin aside, I was still suffering with dreams that I had no control of, where the spiritual spouse pretty much took control of me against my will. And so I was struggling with that, and it was, yeah.
And another thing I'm going to speak about tonight that's going to be foreign to many people. With Jody's case, we dealt with an ancestral part. This is something a lot of Christians don't understand. We know we deal with the demonic and we cast them out. We know we deal with dissociated parts of the person that's been through trauma. The world of psychology have documented this in the DSM-5. It's called dissociative identity disorder. It's a part of the person's mind that's dissociated and formed a separate form of consciousness that's separate to the core person. So the core person's going through life, but as soon as someone triggers them, that's similar to the trigger when the first trauma incurred, that part comes forward and it acts as the victim. But one thing we also deal with is ancestral soul bonds. You guys understand in the Bible forming a soul tie with someone through sexual relations or even friendships. David and Jonathan were knitted together. You can become one with the prostitute. You become one with your wife. It says, leave your mother and father, cling to your wife, you shall become one flesh. But what also is transferred genetically and through the DNA is ancestral soul parts of an ancestor that did evil. Because what the demonic does is it anchors itself to that. And when the demonic comes in the womb, in the DNA, it brings the soul part of that ancestor with it because of the evil that it did. So we dealt with a part of a witch that was in Jodi's bloodline. And I believe through the session that this part in her DNA was the one driving her into progressive form of witchcraft. So we actually dealt with that. That was resolved, and that's where we came after that. So Jodi, just to give you more pointers here, can you share how rejection affected your life, socially, relationships, etc., even in church?
Yeah, so I guess coming out of the progressive church, how that happened was during COVID, I had more time to myself, and I had just started a new Bible study group. I was encouraged to read the Bible for myself, and I also met my husband, who was my husband at the time, but he was also challenging me on a lot of my beliefs. And so the Bible just gave me revelation after revelation of who God was and what his commandments were for us. And I just felt really convicted by my own life that I wasn't actually loving God the way that I should, that I wasn't like loving him at all. You know, I was rejecting him. And so coming out of that...
Why were you rejecting him, do you think? Why weren't you allowing him to come in close?
I think the core of it, I've kind of come to a revelation of that recently, is the fear of man and not the fear of God. So right. I was fearing man's acceptance as opposed to wanting God's acceptance and his acceptance alone. So I was getting revelations of the Bible and his commandments, but actually living that out was becoming harder than actually knowing it, because God gave me the revelation and the understanding, but then living that out became a whole another struggle, because especially with the submission part, God gave me a revelation of how like the beauty of like submitting to my husband.
On that point, let's talk about that. Explain to people what the spirit of Jezebel, how it functions in a relationship from in hindsight. Yeah, so
I had been dealing with the spirit of Jezebel, which figured out later on, but that spirit would just be telling me lies in my head about my relationship with my husband and my relationship with other people, just like this pride. I would imagine scenarios that weren't even real, of just like imaginary arguments and conversations that would affirm what I was feeling. So just a lot of lies.
So a lot of mind control.
My mind control, yeah. I felt like I was being like tormented
from
just all these.
What do you say to people in this audience that say, Jodi, I think that was just your own thoughts? How do you tell someone who has a skeptic? Because there are a lot of Christian skeptics out there that are humanists that will say, yeah, but Jodi, that was just your thoughts. Are those thoughts still there that were there before?
So now, actually, like after having that deliverance, I treat my thoughts like completely differently. Like when I would go down those spirals of thoughts, it's like I couldn't stop. But now every time I lie, because, you know, the Satan still does try to afflict us, a lie comes, I notice it straight away. I'm like, that's a lie. Like, get behind me, Satan.
But let's I'm just going to badger this point a little bit, because I want to give space for atheists and agnostics, because I love them too, and I'm compassionate about them too. One thing I've noticed with the spirit of Jezebel especially, it's in the mind, and it digs itself into the rejection. So it amplifies all the rejected thoughts, amplifies them. What the difference is, once that spirit is cast out, those thoughts are not as pervasive as they were before, and the individual can actually pull down the thoughts as from before. When Jezebel's there, they actually can't control the thoughts. It's very hard for them. But let's just try and push this point a bit further, Jody, for the atheist out there, if they're out there, or the Christian skeptic who says, Jody, these were all your thoughts. Yes, they were bad thoughts, but now Sal just gave you some techniques to take control of those thoughts. How can you prove to us that it was a demon?
Okay, if I was thinking of it from the evolutionist perspective and the fact that over a period of time, humankind is supposed to progress, get better. We find coping mechanisms in our brain that helps us to be able to live longer. If that's the case, then why does the mind attack itself? You know, it's like if the point is for survival and the survival of the fittest, why does the mind attack itself? And that's because we have spiritual forces that work against us, spiritual forces that hate us.
Now, Jody, did you know in the DSM-5, the psychology manual that they study like our Bible, it calls it trance and possession disorder. And when it describes it, it says an external force separate to the mind construct of the person, outside of the person, influencing its will over the person's mind. So the own DSM-5 describes it. It just doesn't... there's no methodology that comes with it. They still treat it like a human condition. So, Jody, if people they see videos on YouTube, especially my channel, where the person is behaving undeniably out of character, would you say when you went through the process of expulsion, were you out of character? Were you unhinged?
Yes, for sure.
If looks could kill, I'd be dead.
Yes, so strange. Deliverance can be so strange, can't it?
Well, explain to people again, the skeptic, how did you feel in that moment where everything was coming to a head on the inside, where Jezebel was on the line?
Yeah.
Because what was interesting is that morning we had a private session, and we did confront that power.
Yeah.
But the Lord led us to deal with other stuff, so I still knew it was there. And when I came to pray for you in the meeting, in the back of my mind I said, I'm going to go for Jezebel. And when I addressed it, that spirit was shocked.
Yes.
It wasn't expecting me to do that. So, but at that point, it had no more legal rights because we had broken everything apart.
That's right, yeah.
So how did you feel in that moment? Your mother actually said to me, I was so happy that I was part of that situation. How did you feel at that moment when we were dealing with that?
Yeah.
Did you feel ashamed, embarrassed?
No. I'm not really ashamed, no. I guess I'm kind of used to it by then. So yeah, in our session before that session with everyone else, it's a bit hard to describe, but in that moment you're sort of in the back of your mind and there's something in the front of you talking out of your mouth, saying things that you wouldn't say. So I had demons talking out of me, telling them who they were and the legal rights, things like that. And things I didn't know about my own ancestral line were coming up in these talks, in this deliverance. But when that moment comes, when it finally says, I'm going to leave and go to the pit, there's just this yell, I guess, that comes out, especially for me. I just screamed uncontrollably. I couldn't control myself. I don't think I can scream like that normally. And it just felt like such a release. I felt so much lighter. I could even see things clearer. It was just,
What about reading the Bible after that?
Reading the Bible after that. Yeah, I think my prayer life has definitely changed because in prayer I would get distracted by the thoughts and the lies that would come. But after that session, I feel like I can actually concentrate on God and keep focused on Him.
But is the journey, there's still challenges moving forward?
That's right, yeah.
Right.
Because like I said before, Satan will still try to afflict you situationally, even feed lies into you again. It's funny because it seems like he's trying to use the same tactics as he was before.
But they don't have the same power.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's give Jody a hand. I told you she was articulate. Chrissy, when did you become a Christian?
I actually knew God as a little girl, but had a very distorted figure of God. When I was a little girl, God was my rescue. I hoped that God would rescue me. And then as time went on, because there was a lot of trauma in my life, and as time went on, I basically thought that I wasn't worthy of God. And God had to actually reveal himself to me through all the trauma, and he had to... it's been a process, it's been a gradual process, but he's had to teach me that I am worthy, that I am on this earth for a reason.
And did he do that in one day?
No, it's been as I say, it's been a very big process. It's there's been a lot of trauma, unfortunately. So.
And Chrissy's a miracle, that's for sure. Were your parents Christians?
Do you want me to tell what they were?
Or you can just say yes or no.
No, definitely not.
Okay. How did you come to know Jesus if they weren't Christians? What happened? How did that happen?
Okay, so at the age of 4 years old, I was actually placed into a children's home, an orphanage, where I lived for 16 years.
Wow.
And so we had to actually, we were made to go to church. And that's why I saw God as my rescuer. I was hoping that he'd take me out and I would go into a family. At the age of 16, I was told that they could not find any family for me. So I moved to a youth hostel, which became very rebellious. and then just...
I don't believe you were a rebel. Gee, that's amazing. That's a long time. So you mean you saw other kids go into homes during that time?
Yeah.
And did it feel like, obviously, nobody wants me?
Yeah.
So at some point from that age to 16, was there a part where you just said, well, maybe God doesn't love me? Or did you never think that?
I probably did. I think that's where my if I say the right word, warped sense of God was.
Okay.
Because it was like, well, God, why? Like, why? Why can't you give me a family? Why? You're this miracle God. You're this, this healing God. And yet, I'm not fitting in here. Like, yeah.
Was there any love in the orphanage, or was it just a roof and food?
We had 25 kids in the orphanage. And we had, it was just basically a roof. Like, I hate to say this, but I have a joke now that says, I was kicked up, not raised up. It was, there was a lot of harsh punishment and a lot of things that I had to go through.
And what were so you said, obviously, there was a rebellious story. What were your teenage years like after 16 when you left? In the youth hostel.
Actually, I'll go through it. So, at the age of 16, because I was in a youth hostel, I was in a rebellious place where a lot of vulnerable teenagers were. And the first weekend was including popping tyres, using marijuana, alcohol, being promiscuous.
Through that lifestyle, do you think, what was driving the promiscuous lifestyle? Were you looking for love? Did it feel like...
definitely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what else can you say about being married, having kids, and all that part of it? Did the abuse continue into your life?
I certainly did. So I was longing to be loved. I was longing to have, I thought men were the answer, basically. And my mother was a prostitute, so I believe that could have been part of that as well. And so I married a Freemason.
But Chrissy, at that time that you married a Freemason, did you know that was in your bloodline?
no.
See, she
No.
didn't know. She didn't know.
No.
So what had come out of all the ministry is not only was it in the bloodline, it was extensive and it was very high level. And now I think later on down the line, Chrissy started to put the dots together and go, now I know why there's been so much turmoil. How destructive is the big F?
My experience is that Freemasonry is very real.
Is it a happy boys' club, just a fraternity that guys get together and drink coffee and discuss boys' stories?
Look, I don't know exactly what they do in there, and I've never discussed it. However, so my husband was a Freemason. My mother-in-law was a sister of the Eastern Star. Her sister was as well, and the grandfather was high up in the Blue Lodge. And who knows how far it went back there. However, unfortunately, I got divorced after 3 years, and I believe it was the Freemasonry because God actually showed me that there is a Freemasonry building right opposite the family courts of Sydney.
Yeah, hear this.
And I believe that is why there is a lot of deception in these family courts, but I was accused of several things that were false allegations against me, and I had to fight for my eldest son. And then things became uglier down the track. Had to fight for my eldest son again, and I lost my other son. So my belief is that I could never believe that when I was at a prayer group, someone actually was praying over somebody else. And they actually said, you've got an assignment on your life. And I just thought about it and I thought, wait a minute, I think I've got an assignment on my life, you know. I'd had deliverance before, like I'd had like several deliverances. But it wasn't until Selwyn, like that was, as Selwyn mentioned before, it was actually, so I wasn't part of this church. I used to go to this church, not this church, but another church, and at Minto, and I had a girlfriend, actually, just a friend, that said, do you want to go to church? And I said, oh, okay. I said, and she didn't show up to that church, but I went. And it was just so happened that, because I felt like God had said, you need to still be here. And then I got the prompting of something big is going to happen for you tonight, and I need you to stay here. Now, when Selwyn actually ministered to me, he had no idea who I was, no idea what thought I was, and he basically delivered me from the Bride of Satan. And I thought, oh my gosh, who is this man? And
But
then,
after that, you were sceptical of me.
oh, I was very sceptical because, I'm going to be honest. I thought I had met him at a church before, and that wasn't him. I remember our one of our sessions, God actually speaks to me in the clouds. I'm very...
Before we continue, you tell about that. So, because you've heard Chrissy's background, how she grew up, the Lord speaks in very unique ways to her. And she's going to show you and just talk a little bit about it. But as I came back to my beginning introduction, I think I felt God's heart relating to her. I didn't know her. In fact, I didn't even know what she said about the orphanage, how long she was there. I didn't know. But at some point, a lot of time went past where I didn't hear from her. But the Lord spoke to me one day and said, don't let this woman go. And I kept messaging her and keeping her engaged. And eventually, she trusted me enough to continue with the journey. But listen to how God speaks to Chrissy. Okay.
Yeah, I'm very blessed to know that God is real because, as I say, I had such a warped idea who God was. And I really couldn't understand, why everything was happening. Like I believe that I was praying, but there was such a strong hold on my life that I fully don't understand it. Maybe one day I will. But God actually started, so I fought for my son in Parramatta, and I've got photos of each one of these. There are some that I don't actually have photos of. But I went near the family courts of Parramatta because it says in the Bible that He is our provider, and we had. I believe that each job that He's given me is from Him, and so I was walking around Parramatta, and I felt this look up. So I looked up, and there was a dove, and he said, and the judge had already said in the courtroom that I would not fit into the community. And this was only about fighting for my son, that he obviously had letters there to say that I had some sort of mental illness. But, yeah.
And by the way, she is so far from mental illness, it's not funny. So it's amazing what the enemy tries to label on people. She is sound in mind, in my opinion, but people were trying to label her as mentally ill.
I've actually had professionals now say to me, Chrissy, we see people with your amount of trauma on drugs and alcohol, self-harming, whatnot. What is your secret? Before, I used to go, I'm not going to say. But you know what? I answer them. And I do. I say, you know what? Jesus lives. Jesus is the restorer, and He is the one that is my focus.
Chrissy, how do you feel tonight compared to 2 years ago? What is the change? What feels different?
As I say, it's been a gradual thing, because before Selwyn came, there was actually some deliverance done. I went to a ministry where actually the Freemasonry, when I was renouncing stuff, I fell to the floor, and I had the whole ministry team actually run after me because they were worried about me. But Selwyn's technique, or whatever God's given his ability, is just that much more powerful. And it's like one was like, little kicks, but Selwyn's what Selwyn's actually been given is like, I'm punching him, and Selwyn and I actually do. We sort of. Are we ready? Are we ready? Are we ready to get him? Because
we joke before we're about to deal with the demonic. But just to let know what she's saying, she's trying to articulate it's the anointing. We're just conduits. Chrissy goes and evangelizes on the streets of Sydney. We are conduits. God just uses our vessel. But it's a calling and a mantle and an anointing. But it's funny, when we would engage, we'd go, okay, you ready? We're ready to go? And then bang, it's on. And we're fighting the devil. But Chrissy, if people said to you, well, I asked Jody, Chrissy, this stuff was in your mind because you grew up in an orphanage. How can you prove to us that there was actually evil spirits driving all your behavior?
People have seen me from the past, and they know who I am. I've come a long way, and that's only through a progression of what God has done for me. I'm going to be honest, this world was very scary for me, very scary. There have been people that I never thought would just shun me. Like, there are people that just, I found my real auntie, she shunned me, and, they're just...
You know what I think, Chrissy? I think God wanted you all for Himself. Don't you think that? I think God wanted her all for Himself. Maybe that's why no family came. He said, no, I want her all for myself. Because I've never met anybody, and I meet a lot of people this is just one example of how God speaks to her in the clouds. She saw a footprint. She showed me the picture today. An actual sandal footprint in the clouds. You can't deny it. Look at this. Look at this. Let's hand that around. Sarah, maybe you take it and just someone hand it around. Have a look at that. And Pastor Joy actually said it looks like a Roman sandal.
This one here, I actually have been on a Zoom meeting with a prophet, and he actually said to me, I had bowel surgery, 2 bowel surgeries, so I shouldn't be here. I had a perforated bowel and I had to get surgery. And during that time, I had 3 cancellations of the hospital, so I was very anxious. I was like, oh my gosh, like, is this going to happen? But then one night, the pastor actually said to me, Chrissy, God's telling me that you are going to be fine, that your mind will be renewed and your body will be renewed. Now, if you can see through the first photo, I actually saw that from my lounge room, and it actually looks like a fire. And then God said, you need to go outside. And I went outside, and there was a cloud. It wasn't a rainbow. It was a cloud. It was a rainbow in the cloud, and the rainbow actually represents God's covenant. The rainbow says, that He promises. And He doesn't break His promises. Unfortunately, through my childhood, I had so many broken promises. And that's why Selwyn says, like, I didn't trust anybody. Like, I'm still hesitant to trust a lot of people because, I got hurt over and over and over again. But the only person that hasn't hurt me and has showed me so much love is God Himself. And that's why, when someone asked me to testify, I'm like, whoa, okay, this is big for me, but I need to actually, that's why I evangelise all through Sydney, because,
And for people to see that, people that know you, that have labelled you, to see that you're normal, because I've never ever seen you as anything but normal, because I know there's a reason for things. I'm going to give you all an opportunity, as you've been listening to Chrissy talk. Is there anything you guys want to say, Ranesh, before I'm going to actually go and ask people? Get your questions ready. We're going to take a few questions for them that you want to ask. Ranesh, is there anything you would like to say?
Just the uniqueness of God in our individual lives and how He's so real and makes Himself come down to our level. And that's the beauty of God, and people won't understand.
Because, Ranesh, in Islam, Allah doesn't come down to our level, does He? But our God comes down to our level.
Yeah.
So you feel God literally came down, stood with you.
Yes. Yeah.
And to anybody out there, and it's even listening online, that's a skeptic, and that's even atheist, you've got 3 people here. They're not getting paid to say this. They're testifying that there was an invisible force, not the force, may the force be with you, an invisible force that was personalized to them, that's Jesus, that they can testify has helped them in their life. Because like Chrissy said, people have said, therapists that have spoken to her said, anybody else that went through what you through should be dead. And another thing that's interesting with trauma that they've gone through, your body actually manifests the trauma through sickness and through all those kinds of things. Jody, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Sorry. Mine's for, I guess, the younger people. There's a verse in James that says, he who doubts is like a wave that's driven and tossed by the wind. Don't doubt God's judgments, because if you do doubt, then you become just tossed and driven by the wind. Like, you'll never have any stability in your life. God's the stability in your life, and He's the one truth.
Yeah, it's like a ship without a rudder.
That's right.
A double-minded man is divided in all his ways. So I'm going to come down. Raise your hand if you've got a question for these guys, and I'm going to come down and let you ask your question. Joyce, you want to go first?
I want to say how grateful I am. I travelled all the way to Sydney today to hear your testimonies. I think I know you, Ranesh, don't I, from the other church, yes. But Chrissy, I want to say to you how glad I am to see you sitting there whole and smiling and testifying about Jesus, because so many people in the church today do not believe that we can have demons within us. And to see you free is just a wonderful... It's made my birthday, because I'm 82 in 2 days' time. And it's a present to me for that.